Hi guys, welcome back. We are now discussing the last component of spending in the aggregate demand model, that is net export spending. And when we talk about net exports, we are basically talking about exports minus imports. And the reason why we are deducting imports is because when we calculate total spending in the economy, we add up consumer spending, we add up investment spending, we add up government spending, and hence export spending as well. But you see, in all of these components, you might have some spending. Maybe the government is spending some money on imports by buying raw materials that are used in the construction of dams and roads and right? Or maybe importing some office supplies that it needs to use in its office, or consumers also import, maybe firms also import raw materials for its own production that it needs to do, right? So I mean, so consumers ho gaye, individuals ho gaye, firms ho gaye, even the governments also have expenditures that are actually not spent on domestic goods but goods that are produced abroad. सो हम करते क्या हैं कि हम जितने भी इंपोर्ट्स होती हैं हमारी, चाहे वो इंपोर्ट्स कंज्यूमर्स कर रहे हैं, इंडिविजुअल्स कर रहे हो, हाउस होल्ड्स कर रहे हो, विच आर इंक्लूडेड इन कंजम्पशन स्पेंडिंग, राइट? या आपकी मतलब दैट आर बेसिकली पार्ट ऑफ कंजम्पशन स्पेंडिंग बेसिकली. लेकिन जब हम इंपोर्ट्स को माइनस कर देते हैं तो ऑटोमेटिकली हम उसको डिडक्ट कर रहे होते हैं, कंजम्पशन स्पेंडिंग से भी वो डिडक्ट हो जाती हैं. सो बेसिकली व्हाट वी आर सेइंग इज़ के इसी तरीके से इन्वेस्टमेंट स्पेंडिंग हो गई, आपकी गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग हो गई, इन सब के अंदर थोड़ा थोड़ा इंपोर्ट वो एक्सपेंडिचर्स जो इंपोर्ट्स पे हो रहे होते हैं वो शामिल होते हैं. तो हमें वो डिडक्ट करने होते हैं बिकॉज हम जीडीपी फाइंड आउट कर रहे होते हैं. व्हेन वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट एग्रीगेट डिमांड, यू टॉकिंग अबाउट टोटल स्पेंडिंग दैट टेक्स प्लेस ऑन डोमेस्टिक goods. Now, a lot of spending also takes place on, or some of the spending also takes place on goods that are not produced domestically, that are produced in foreign countries or overseas, right? And consumers in firms and governments import them, so we need to deduct them. सही है. तो वो कंजम्पशन स्पेंडिंग में भी शामिल होती हैं वो इंपोर्ट्स, इन्वेस्टमेंट स्पेंडिंग में भी वो इंपोर्ट का कंपोनेंट शामिल हो सकता है, गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग में भी हो सकता है. ठीक है. तो हम करते क्या हैं कि हम बेसिकली जब हम एक्सपोर्ट स्पेंडिंग लिखते हैं तो एक्सपोर्ट स्पेंडिंग में क्योंकि हम एक्सपोर्ट रेवेन्यूज़ इंक्लूड कर रहे होते हैं, विच इज़ एक्चुअली exports are reflecting the foreign demand for domestic goods. Exports जो होती हैं they are basically foreign demand for domestic goods. तो foreign spending होती है on the domestic goods, right? So हम इधर से इसको नेट ऑफ कर देते हैं, हम एक्सपोर्ट्स में से इंपोर्ट्स को नेट ऑफ कर देते हैं. जो हम एम माइनस कर रहे होते हैं, ये जो एम यहाँ पे इंपोर्ट्स माइनस हो रहा होता है, इसमें सारी इंपोर्ट्स होती हैं जो जो कंज्यूमर स्पेंडिंग में भी इंक्लूडेड होंगी, प्रॉब्ली इन्वेस्टमेंट स्पेंडिंग में भी, फर्म्स ने जो इंपोर्ट किया होगा उससे भी इंक्लूडेड होंगी, गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग में भी इंक्लूडेड होंगी. तो सारी यहीं से नेट ऑफ हो जाती हैं. हम एम यहाँ पे सब कुछ सारी इंपोर्ट्स क्लब करके एक्स में से माइनस कर देते हैं और हम क्या लिख देते हैं, हम नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स लिख देते हैं. तभी टोटल स्पेंडिंग जो डोमेस्टिक गुड्स पे हो रही होती है, यानी एग्रीगेट डिमांड इज रिफ्लेक्टिंग your total expenditures, total spending on domestic goods, right? So total spending on domestic goods, that is why it comprises of जो हम कहते हैं CIG and your net exports basically, right? So point is कि हम उसको point is कि we basically the last component reflects our net exports, which is exports minus imports, and we deduct the import component from our exports. Right, and this import component could include, like I said, it could include imports that are done by individuals, firms, or the government as well, because all different people in the economy import various goods. We import raw materials, sometimes capital. Firms import capital goods as well, right? Right. So consumers import luxury goods, etc., etc. Sometimes we import medicines, right? So all of this is basically amount spent on goods and services that are not produced domestically, so we need to deduct them from our spending because aggregate demand factors in domestic expenditures. It factors in expenditures or spending on domestic goods. Now, a lot of spending that takes place on domestic goods does not happens by domestic consumers, domestic firms, and domestic governments, right? Some of the spending also takes place by foreign governments, by foreign firms, by foreign individuals for our domestic goods, जो कि exports की that are actually captured by our exports, right? So net exports की जब हम बात करें, we're talking about exports minus imports, X for exports, M for imports. So export revenue is technically the spending, the foreign spending that is done by foreign consumers, foreign individuals, and the governments and the firms on our domestic production, right? While imports is reflecting the imports is reflecting all the expenditures that are done by our domestic consumers, individuals, firms, and the government on foreign produced goods, right? ये याद रखिएगा कि जब हम नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स की बात करते हैं तो दैट इज़ एक्स माइनस एम. जब भी हम कहेंगे कि नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स राइज हो रही हैं तो एग्रीगेट डिमांड विल इंक्रीज. ठीक है. नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स राइज कब होती हैं? नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स राइज होती हैं जब आपकी एक्सपोर्ट्स बढ़ रही हों या इम्पोर्ट्स, या फिर एंड और इम्पोर्ट्स गिर रही हों. ठीक है. इसी तरीके से व्हेन आवर नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स आर फॉलिंग, ठीक है, नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स आर फॉलिंग, एग्रीगेट डिमांड विल फॉल, इट विल शिफ्ट टू द लेफ्ट. It will reflect a negative demand shock when net exports will fall. When net exports will rise, it will represent a positive demand shock. Net exports fall कब होंगी? जब आपकी exports fall हो जाएंगी या फिर imports बढ़ जाएंगी. ठीक है. या तो exports गिर जाएं या फिर and or basically and or whichever has a greater weightage. ठीक है. So if exports are falling and imports are rising, so your aggregate demand will fall. ठीक है. होप दिस इज़ क्लियर. सो नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स बेसिकली इज़, अगर आप इसको डिफ़ाइन करें एग्ज़ाम में तो आप लिख कर आ सकते हैं कि नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स आपकी नेट डिमांड है फॉर अ नेशंस गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज फ्रॉम द रेस्ट ऑफ द वर्ल्ड. क्योंकि हम यहाँ पे रेस्ट ऑफ द वर्ल्ड को फैक्टर इन कर रहे हैं, क्योंकि हम बेसिकली देखना चाह रहे हैं डोमेस्टिक डिमांड फॉर डोमेस्टिक गुड्स बाय द रेस्ट ऑफ द वर्ल्ड. फिर हम माइनस कर रहे हैं क्या कहते हैं, demand by domestic individuals and firms for the goods and services produced by the rest of the world, right? तो जब हम ये माइनस, इसलिए जब हम इसको नेट ऑफ कर रहे हैं तो जो नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स की वैल्यू है वो रिफ्लेक्ट कर रही है नेट डिमांड फॉर अ नेशंस गुड्स एंड सर्विसेज फ्रॉम द रेस्ट ऑफ द वर्ल्ड. अगर नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स की वैल्यू नेगेटिव होती है, लेट्स से, अगर इफ द वैल्यू ऑफ द नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स इज बेसिकली नेगेटिव, इट मीन्स कि हमारा ट्रेड डेफिसिट आ रहा होगा. इट मीन्स दैट, अब मैं ट्रेड डेफिसिट का वर्ड यहाँ इंट्रोड्यूस नहीं करना चाह रहा था, मैंने बोल दिया, बट ये इतना रेलिवेंट इस वक्त नहीं है, बिकॉज ट्रेड डेफिसिट्स और ये सब चीज़ें हम इंटरनेशनल उसमें पढ़ेंगे बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट में. बट ट्रेड डेफिसिट का मतलब होता है कि योर इम्पोर्ट्स आर मोर देन योर एक्सपोर्ट्स. अगर नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स की वैल्यू नेगेटिव है, इट सिंपली मीन्स दैट आर इम्पोर्ट्स आर मोर देन आर एक्सपोर्ट्स, and right, it will have a negative impact on our balance of payment as well. And it means that we are importing more from the rest of the world than we are exporting to the rest of the world, right? While if it's positive, we'll have a trade surplus. It means that we are exporting to the rest of the world more than what we are importing from the rest of the world, right? इतना आपको पता होना चाहिए. Exports basically आपकी foreign demand होती हैं for domestic goods, while imports are your domestic demand for foreign goods, right? Now basically we need to move on to the determinants of net exports. के net exports के आपके determinants क्या हैं, ठीक है? The first factor that affects your net exports, that is, it basically affects your imports and your exports, is the exchange rate. Now you need to understand what exchange rate is, and exchange rate पे वैसे तो हमारा एक separate chapter है, but इसकी basics थोड़ी सी हम यहाँ introduce करेंगे because it is a factor that affects your net exports. And so exchange rate is a rate at which you exchange one currency with the other currency, right? So let's say if we talk about a dollar, right, which is actually right now worth 300 rupees, right? Now if I have 300 rupees in my pocket and I want to buy a dollar, then I can actually give 300 rupees in the foreign exchange market and I can actually purchase a dollar. While if I have a dollar in my pocket and in exchange I want 300 rupees, then I can sell that dollar in the foreign exchange market and I'll get 300 rupees in return, right? So the external value of the dollar is 300 rupees, while the external value of 300 rupees is a dollar, right? It shows the value of the currency. The exchange rate shows the value of the currency in terms of another currency, right? So it's the external value of the currency. The exchange rate reflects the external value of the currency. Now, if you look at this exchange rate, and if I ask you, if we talk about the domestic currency Pakistan, right, and we talk about PKR, that is Pakistani rupee, right, we're talking about rupees here, Pakistani rupee, And if you look at this exchange rate in front of you, a dollar that is worth 300 rupees, don't you think that the Pakistani rupee or the exchange rate is very weak? Our currency is very weak against the dollar. I am going to repeat what I said. I said that a currency, Pakistani rupee, is very weak against the dollar. Because, and the reason why, when you say that you have a weak currency, it means that the value of rupees against the dollar is so low that in order to buy just $1, you need to give up 300 rupees. My God, that's a lot, right? While if you just have a dollar in your pocket, just a dollar in your pocket, you can actually get 300 rupees, right? So it shows that PKR, Pakistani rupee, is literally valued so less against the dollar, which means it's so weak. Our currency is so weak against the dollar. While on the other hand, the dollar is so strong. It is so strong because from a dollar I can get 300 rupees in Pakistan. Wow. That's cool. So from the perspective of a person holding a dollar in their hand, for him, I mean that for him it's very he'll feel rich because from just a dollar he can actually get 300 rupees, and from a dollar he can buy 300 rupees worth of goods in Pakistan, right? Now what I'm trying to explain to you is कि हम बहुत ज़्यादा exchange rate की depth पे नहीं जाएंगे और इनकी terminologies में भी अभी नहीं जाएंगे because this is not the chapter right now, but क्योंकि इससे connected है so we have to discuss this. फिलहाल हम इतना समझेंगे सिर्फ कि जब भी आपकी करेंसी वीक होती है, जैसे कि पाकिस्तानी करेंसी इज़ वेरी वीक अगेंस्ट द डॉलर, तो अगर आपकी करेंसी ऑलरेडी वीक है या आपकी करेंसी मज़ीद वीक हो जाए, मिसाल के तौर पर $1 जो है वो लेट्स से कल को 400 रुपीज़ का हो जाए. Now this means that our currency has become more weak. इकोनॉमिक्स में इसको, इकोनॉमिक टर्मिनोलॉजीज में इसको डेप्रीसिएशन ऑफ द करेंसी बोलते हैं. अब मैं आपको नहीं समझा रहा इस वक्त कि करेंसी डेप्रीसिएशन क्या होती है बिकॉज ये हमारा चैप्टर नहीं है, लेकिन जिन बच्चों ने ओ लेवल IGCSE इकोनॉमिक्स पढ़ी हुई है उनको समझ आ गई होगी ये बात. जिन्होंने नहीं पढ़ी हुई कोई मसले की बात नहीं है. डेप्रीसिएशन ऑफ द करेंसी सिंपली मीन्स कि आपकी करेंसी की वैल्यू और गिर जाती है. इट जस्ट डिटोरिएट्स फर्दर अगेंस्ट द अदर करेंसी. एंड राइट नाउ वी आर डिस्कसिंग रुपी विद डॉलर, राइट? सो a dollar is now 400 rupees. It means it just, our rupee PKR weakens itself more further. Already इतनी weak थी, 300 rupees का डॉलर था, अब 400 का हो गया. तो it means कि मज़ीद depreciate हो गई है. So now अब आप खुद सोचें ना कि अगर $1, तो अब अगर डॉलर और ज़्यादा गिर गया है, डॉलर और ज़्यादा बढ़ गया है, रुपी और ज़्यादा गिर गया अगेंस्ट द डॉलर, it means that in order to buy the same $1 worth of good, initially I had to pay 300, which was already a lot, but now I have to pay a lot more, that I now have to pay 400. So जब आपकी करेंसी बहुत वीक होती है ना स्टूडेंट्स, तो आपके imports बहुत एक्सपेंसिव होते हैं. क्यों? क्योंकि when you have to import and pay the foreign vendors in their currency, right? Because they are selling their goods in their currency, right? So we need to, in order to pay them, we need dollars, but we have rupees, so we need to convert rupees into dollars, right? अब ये पूरा प्रोसेस और मैकेनिज्म हम बहुत डेप्थ में डिस्कस करेंगे एक्सचेंज रेट के चैप्टर में, बट अभी हम बहुत इसको सुपरफिशियली देख रहे हैं. सो 400 रुपीज़ पे करने पड़ेंगे जस्ट टू बाय अ $1 वर्थ ऑफ गुड. इनिशियली ओनली 300 हैड टू बी पेड. इवन 300 was a lot as well. It was showing कि our currency is so weak. So imports आपके expensive होते हैं, लेकिन exports आपके लिए cheaper होते हैं. Exports क्या होते हैं? आपके अपने goods that the foreign residents or the foreign firms would demand, right? Because you see, from just $1 they can buy 300 worth of our goods, and now from the same $1 they can actually end up buying 400 worth of our goods, right? From that same $1. So उनके लिए तो exports cheaper होते जा रहे हैं. So this is actually, the exchange rate is reflecting the price of imports and exports as well, actually. So exports become cheaper and imports become expensive, right? तो अगर exports cheaper हो जाएंगी, so what will happen when the export becomes cheaper? So economic theory says that if our imports become expensive, so economic theory says that demand for imports will fall. Because imports are expensive, so demand for imports will fall, right? So हम बोलेंगे that the demand for imports will fall and the import expenditures will go down. import expenditures will fall. The spending on imports will fall. And when spending on imports falls, M goes down. While on the other hand, since exports have become cheaper, the demand for exports will rise. The demand for exports will rise, and therefore the export revenues generated by the exports will rise, and so X will rise. तो आप लोगों को मैंने बात बताई थी शुरू में अभी वीडियो के that X, when X goes up and when M goes down, X goes up, M goes down, X goes up, M goes down, it means that net exports rises, meaning AD is going up, right? So, and when AD will rise, your aggregate demand curve will shift outward. So again, a weak exchange rate would have a positive impact on your aggregate demand, and so it will basically result into a positive demand shock, especially if your exchange rate just keeps on weakening itself. And right, on the other hand, if you have a strong exchange rate, right, if the exchange rate is strong, it means that your currency is actually the value of your currency against the other currency is strong. That is, the value of PKR is very strong against the dollar. Let's assume a hypothetical scenario that, let's say, आपकी dollar जो है, let's say is only sort of a dollar is, let's say, you can say how much, let's say 50 rupees right now. कभी ऐसा हुआ नहीं है, बट लेट्स से डॉलर इज सालों पहले था, डॉलर इज़ लेट्स से वर्थ 50 रुपीज़. नाउ टेक्निकली ये भी वीक ही है, बट क्योंकि लेकिन रिलेटिव टर्म्स में स्ट्रॉन्ग है. बट एनीवेज, तो लेट्स अज्यूम दैट, एंड लेट्स से कि पहले डॉलर वाज लेट्स से अराउंड 300, एंड लेट्स से समथिंग रियली हैपन्स दैट हमारा डॉलर जो है वो नीचे आ जाता है एंड रुपीज़ ऊपर चला जाता है. डॉलर नीचे आने का मतलब है डॉलर वीक हो रहा है, रुपीज़ स्ट्रांग हो रहा है अगेंस्ट द डॉलर. सो अगर हमारा रुपी स्ट्रांग हो रहा है और नज़र भी आ रहा है एक्सचेंज रेट स्ट्रांग हो रहा है अगेंस्ट द डॉलर, बिकॉज नाउ in order to buy a dollar we only have to pay 50 rupees. Initially we had to pay 300 rupees to buy a dollar. So it's showing the external value of rupees against the dollar is getting stronger, because now rupees, only 50 rupees have to be given up to buy a dollar, right? So इससे क्या होगा, इससे imports cheaper हो जाएंगे, because initially I had to pay 300 rupees to buy $1 worth of imports, but now I only have to pay 50 rupees to buy $1 worth of imports. So imports are getting cheaper. The price of imports are going down, right? So if import price is going down, देखिए import price का मतलब यहाँ पे imports actually उनकी actual price नहीं गिर रही है, उनकी artificial price गिर रही है because of the exchange rate. ठीक है? So imports become cheaper, the price of imports goes down in artificial terms because of the exchange rate. ठीक है? And so import expenditures, and so demand for imports will go up in this case, and as a result import expenditures will go up. And if import spending goes up, M will go up, right? Well, on the other hand, you can clearly see that exports become cheaper नहीं होना चाहिए. This should be exports become expensive, right? Exports become expensive, because the reason why exports become expensive is because you can clearly see now that from a dollar initially we could get, a dollar could buy 300 rupee worth of Pakistani goods, but now the same dollar can only buy 50 rupees worth of Pakistani goods. So probably Pakistan's exports would shrink and decline because exports are getting expensive. किसके लिए expensive हो रही हैं? उन लोगों के लिए that have the currency dollar, who have dollars to buy from us, who will pay dollar, who will sell their dollars and buy rupees to purchase our goods, right? उनके लिए expensive हो रहा है artificially, because now the dollar is, rupee is strong and dollar is weak, right? So exports will become expensive in this case, and the demand for exports will go down. When the demand for exports will go down, right? So export revenues will go down. So maybe foreign governments or foreign firms or if foreign consumers buy less from us, maybe the rest of the world buys less from us. So the rest of the world buys less from us, the demand for our domestic goods by the rest of the world goes down. So our export revenues would go down. So X goes down, and whenever X goes down and M goes up, X goes down, M goes up, it means that X goes down, M goes up, it means that net exports are falling. and AD is going down. So it will result in a negative demand shock because of the exchange rate factor, and AD would start falling. It will shift inwards. This is a very important factor that affects your, a critical factor that has an effect on the, on the value of our net exports. कि आपका exchange rate जो होता है वो बड़ा important होता है, बहुत matter करता है कि आपकी करेंसी की एक्सटर्नल वैल्यू बहुत मैटर करती है इन टर्म्स ऑफ हाउ मच योर एक्सपोर्ट्स वुड बी एंड हाउ मच योर इम्पोर्ट्स वुड बी. Exchange rate plays a critical role, and that is why governments try to sort of manage the exchange rate and make sure that the currency is somehow stable and doesn't really fluctuates a lot, because that could create problems both for the exporters and the importers. How? हम exchange rate में देखेंगे. Interesting है काफ़ी. The second thing that could affect your net exports is your real disposable incomes earned abroad. Now, you need to understand that exports represent foreign demand for domestic goods. So if the rest of the world is getting richer and richer and richer, then it's good for us because we export to them. So if they are getting richer, they'll buy more from us, right? So if real disposable incomes rise abroad, and when could real disposable incomes rise abroad? When could people abroad become richer? Because maybe their economy is growing, maybe they're witnessing a boom. Boom का मतलब होता है high growth rates, right? Robust economic growth, which is accompanied with rising national incomes, right? So automatically, if they're getting richer, so automatically it will increase the demand for domestic exports. So domestic exports of Pakistan will rise, which will lead to a rise in revenue generated from the exports. And if exports goes up, then net exports will automatically rise. If exports goes up, and let's assume ceteris paribus assumption का मतलब है nothing else changes. So we're not factoring in the fact that we are assuming imports are the same. So if exports goes up, अगर आप दिखाना चाहते हो ना, एग्जाम में बताना चाहते हो कि सिर्फ एक्सपोर्ट्स बढ़ रही हैं और इम्पोर्ट्स को कुछ नहीं हो रहा, तो आप ceteris paribus के assumption डाल देंगे. आप बोलेंगे if exports, आप बोलेंगे leading to a rise, so इसको इस तरह बोलेंगे that, if real disposable incomes earned abroad goes up, then demand for exports will rise and export revenues will rise, right? And so because of a rise in export revenues, bracket open ceteris paribus, your net exports will rise. So it's the moment you say ceteris paribus, it means you're assuming everything else is the same. So you aren't changing your imports. So imports उतनी ही है, ठीक है? इसी तरह real disposable incomes earned at home. So if the real disposable incomes earned at home, if they increase, let's say if Pakistan is doing a great job economically and the national income is going up and we are sort of, witnessing a boom in the country, then what will happen is we will start importing more because people in Pakistan would feel richer. There's more employment, and so real disposable incomes are rising in Pakistan, so imports will rise. So if M rises, your import expenditures will rise. And assuming nothing happens to export revenues, then if import expenditures goes up, then ceteris paribus, your net exports would go down, right? Because net exports is simply X minus M. So if nothing is happening to X, but M is going up, the net exports fall, so AD will fall. So because when net exports fall, your AD shifts to the left. So it's a bad thing for us. Now, whether it's a bad thing or not, we need to figure that out. This is again an evaluation or a debatable point, but वो हम again international trade exchange rate पे देखेंगे, not the discussion right now. दूसरी चीज़ ये कि let's say that if Pakistan goes through a recession, right? अगर अभी तो आपने डिस्कस किया कि economic growth अच्छी हो रही है, but what if the Pakistan goes through a recession? So let's say Pakistan is going through a recessionary phase and economic growth is stagnation है, slow down आ रहा है कोई economy में, ultimately you're facing recessionary impacts in the economy. देखिए पहले इकोनॉमी में स्लो डाउन आता है, स्टैग्नेशन आती है, फिर रिसेशन आ जाता है, ठीक है? सो वी आर सॉर्ट ऑफ समवेयर इन द मिडल, लेट्स से. अल्टीमेटली हम वट एवर असम्पशन यू वांट टू टेक, यू से रिसेशन आ जाता है तो ठीक है. But let's say that economic growth is going down, so that will cause unemployment and it will result into real disposable incomes that are earned at home to fall. अब जब real disposable incomes fall होंगी तो एक अच्छी चीज़ ये भी होगी कि people will import less, because when people have less money in their hands, not only will they buy less goods domestically, but they will also import less as well, right? Although necessary imports तो फिर भी होंगी, especially those imports that have an inelastic demand, वो तो होंगी ही होंगी. Necessary imports तो होंगी, like medicines and all of that, or maybe firms want to import some important equipment or capital goods, वो तो होगा. But especially luxury goods के ऊपर एक में decline आएगा definitely. इसको इकोनॉमिक्स में बोलते हैं लेस sucking in of imports. Less imports will be sucked in the economy. This is an economic terminology, right? So what economists say is that when there's a recession going on in the economy, so when national incomes go down, there will be less sucking in of imports, which will reduce the demand for imports, and hence it will reduce the expenditure on imports. And ceteris paribus, this will actually increase the value of X minus M, because when import expenditures goes down, what you're saying is that when import expenditures goes down, you're saying that M goes down. M का मतलब ही import expenditure है. हम M को imports को units में नहीं measure कर रहे होते, हम import की value देख रहे होते हैं, the amount of money that is spent on imports. So that is reflecting import expenditures. So when you're saying import expenditures going down, right? So ceteris paribus, this will actually increase the value of net exports. So net exports will go up because your M is going down, and since you set ceteris paribus, it means that we're not factoring. So we're assuming exports to be constant. So if M is going down, then net exports have to go up, right? This is going to increase the value of X minus M net exports, right? So it increases your net exports. Net exports ऐसे भी लिख सकते हैं, increases the value of X minus M भी लिख सकते हैं. It's just understood, right? Net exports is X minus M, right, guys? So अगर net exports बढ़ेंगी, so again aggregate demand shock आएगा, positive AD will shift outwards, right, guys? The last factor that I need to discuss is about government restrictions on free trade. Now, free trade is again a feature of free market economics, where you encourage globalization and you encourage the free movement of capital and goods in the economy. And so you see, governments do restrict trade, just like we know that Donald Trump has been imposing restrictions on on the imports from Canada and Mexico by imposing tariffs, right? Similarly, governments do restrict free trade. They impose trade restrictions. Restricting free trade means restricting making your imports expensive, reducing either the quantity or the number of imports that could be imported, or just making them expensive. So if governments increase trade barriers or just impose new trade barriers on, let's say, our exports. Let's say if foreign governments impose trade barriers, or they just increase or impose new trade barriers on our domestic Pakistani exports, such as they impose tariffs on us or quotas on us, or maybe they just impose some non-tariff barriers. अब ये टैरिफ बैरियर्स क्या हैं, नॉन टैरिफ बैरियर्स क्या हैं, ये हम इंटरनेशनल ट्रेड में पढ़ेंगे. लेकिन जस्ट टू ब्रीफ यू आउट, आई एम अज्यूमिंग दैट यू गाइज नो व्हाट अ टैरिफ इज. A tariff is simply a tax on imports, right? So if the rest of the world was importing from us and their governments impose tariffs on us, then our exports will get expensive. So tariff is simply an import tax. It just makes the import expensive, right? So if we were exporting to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world is their governments are imposing trade barriers on us, which means they're imposing tariffs on us, let's say. So it will make their imports expensive and our exports expensive. It will make their imports expensive because they are the ones who are imposing tariffs on us. So their imports will get expensive, which is a good thing for them because that's what they wanted. But it will also make our exports expensive because our export prices would go up because of their tariffs that they have imposed on our exports. And so the demand for exports will go down, and that will reduce export revenue. So it's a bad thing for us, at least in theory. So our exports will go down, right? And if our exports goes down, then ceteris paribus, assuming nothing is happening to imports, then that will reduce the value of our net exports because X minus M goes down then, right? So if net exports goes down, AD goes down. So if the rest of the world is imposing trade restrictions on us by imposing, let's say, tariffs, right, then our exports would go down because our exports will get expensive in that case. ठीक है, because now it will be harder for us to export to international markets because of tariffs being imposed on us, right? A बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग टॉपिक है टैरिफ्स का एंड इंटरनेशनल ट्रेड का, जो हम इंटरनेशनल ट्रेड में कवर करेंगे. विल जस्ट बिकम, आई मेक श्योर दैट दिस टॉपिक इज एक्चुअली वेरी फैसिनेटिंग, और ये आता भी है, पास्ट पेपर्स में भी आता है, केस स्टडीज़ में भी आता है, राइट? So guys, these are the reasons. This is what actually impacts your net exports, and actually इफ़ योर नेट एक्सपोर्ट इज इम्पैक्टेड, इसमें से कोई भी फैक्टर चेंज होगा जो आपके नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स को आइदर पॉजिटिवली या नेगेटिवली इम्पैक्ट करेगा, या तो आपके नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स को बढ़ा देगा या आपके नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स को गिरा देगा, कोई भी फैक्टर, तो डेफिनेटली दैट विल बेसिकली हैव एन, उससे होगा क्या, उससे आपकी जो नेट एक्सपोर्ट्स में जो भी चेंज आएगा, दैट विल अल्टीमेटली रिजल्ट इनटू changes across the aggregate demand, resulting into shocks across the economy, either AD going up or AD going down. Right, guys? So that ends the topic of our aggregate demand, and now we will now be moving on to aggregate supply from the next video. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, take care.